Welcome back to the first turn. This is Llama. Llama Paints Minis. And here I'm just showing a very simple, uh, well, time-lapsed video. And you can see I'm painting a head here. The pictures have already been posted on Instagram for this one. It was an extra head that I had. The Space Marine Imperial Fists Captain Tor Garadon, the guy with the biggest chin and biggest power fist in the galaxy. I had used his body for another project a long time ago, a conversion for an Iron Hands army I used to collect and play. And so this great big mug was just kind of left over. And I'm not kidding, his proportions are ridiculous, as a lot of things in the Warhammer 40k miniature range tend to be. But here we see I'm just going to do some basic blocking and framing of his face. It's not the complete version of it. My camera actually kind of stopped when I was getting to the fine-tuning stages. Unfortunately, that's probably an area people wanted to see. And I'll do another one and then slow it down so people can watch how I do that. Faces are really among my favorite things in miniature painting to paint, especially at this scale. 25, 28, 32 mil, that range. The kind of things you see on tabletop or, of course, in Golden Demon. And I just really enjoy faces. It's something I practice a lot. With Games Workshop kits in particular, you get lots and lots of spare heads a lot of times in at least the humanoid ranges. And so you can just really play with different skin tones. But most importantly, getting used to the planes of light. And the paints I'm using here are just Kimera paints. I started with something from the expansion set 1, the royal brown, a little bit of oxide brown medium, and a little bit of alizarin crimson. So I have this very kind of burnt red look. Of course, you can always use a burnt red if you have one, or in the base starter set, there's one that's a very red brown that would work. But like a burnt red from Monument Hobbies or red brown from Vallejo, those would do the same kind of trick. Maybe Doom Bowl if you're using Citadel. But I start with that because the transparent nature of acrylic paint, of course, will allow some of what you've laid down early to still kind of show through, or at the very least affect the later stages of paint. Now, you can use any, for this guy, I mean, he's got like a Caucasian, skin tone. And there's a ton of them out there that you can use, whichever one's your favorite. Here I just mixed them on the palette with a little bit of a red and a little bit of a yellow, and kind of got a Caucasian skin tone of my own to work as the mid. So after I laid down that reddish brown base coat, I'm working up through that sort of self-made Caucasian skin. Unfortunately, his head goes off the screen there a few times. Apologies for that. And then there is one from the signature series of Kimera. I think it's the Danilo Catracci line. There's one actually called Caucasian Skin. And that one is kind of pre-mixed, as it were. And you can use that straight out if you don't want to mix them yourself. But I'm really enjoying the process of like mixing these and discovering what I can get. So when I talked about I was blocking or framing in, you can see there I'm laying down some very general shapes. Basically on the forward-facing elements, I'm focusing on where the front of the skull would be, and then just leaving like the temples and the part of the cheek that goes back towards the ear, just leaving those kind of in the darker tone to start with. I find that it helps me with my planes of light, deciding then where I'm going to punch up the highlights, where I'm going to then glaze in or tint in the shadows if I need any. And then I can later do the refinement to blend or add wrinkles or facial hair or anything like that. And I'll do something more thorough and in-depth as my camera equipment and such gets a little better. And because I would love to show people my process. I tend to get a lot of compliments on my face work. And this isn't the clearest picture of what I do here, but I mean, nothing magical. It's just about trusting the process. You can see there I'm using very light touches with just the tip of the brush. And you can do this and get a long working time if you load the brush up correctly. You mix the paint to the consistency you're comfortable with on the palette, and that's the consistency it will be on the brush. And so I load it with enough water and paint, take off the excess so I have a fine point, and I don't take the excess off on a tissue or paper towel or anything like that, because that will wick moisture out of the brush, and now you've changed the dilution, you've changed the ratio that you worked so hard to mix perfectly on the palette. So I will just wipe it off there, like on my thumb, something that's not spongy, it's not going to absorb the water or the paint off the brush, but it gives me the shape. Make sure I'm not flooding the model, because that's not what I want to do here. And then I go to work, and I get a nice long working time with it. And all I've done there as I go up the highlight range is I've just mixed the sort of base Caucasian skin tone with a little bit of a very, very light yellow. And there's a cold yellow that Kimera makes in the base set. And then one of the signature series one's by Michael Pisarski, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce other names. It's called Sun Day or Sun Ray or something like that. But it's a very pale yellow. The bottle looks almost like banana candy, but the color reminds me of ice yellow from Vallejo, if you're familiar with that, or Dorn yellow if you use Citadel paints. But it's basically an off-white that leans just a little bit yellow. And I'm just mixing up through that as I do the highlight stages on the upward-facing parts of his face. And then I lean more into sort of the rosy reds or pinks for the areas like the cheeks and the nose. And so there is a distinction between those two highlights. I find if you use the same exact highlight mixture on all areas of the face, it ends up looking a little bit flat. And that's perfectly fine for something that's, say, tabletop. Or if you just want to punch up a hero to look a little better than tabletop. But if you really want to go farther with faces, I think distinguishing that the upper area, the middle area, and the lower area into three, sort of a Neapolitan kind of thought process, is really a good way to get a lot of visual interest in a face that's that small. You can see I've blocked in his hair a little bit. It's tricky to work with these pale colors and have yellow in the highlight when then his hair is also going to be blonde. So I'll explain it another time how I made those distinguish. But his face was fun. I felt like it was just going to waste sitting there on a sprue since I used the rest of his model for another project. And again, I just love faces. I find it's a real good way. It's a real good way to stay sharp, and it's kind of a palette cleanser for me to go back and work on those. Every face is sculpted just a little different, but these models in particular, these Warhammer figures, the Space Marine faces are just so clean, so crisp, so well defined, and a great practice tool. So anyway, I hope you found this useful, and we'll talk to you next time.